Good afternoon. My name's Stephen Cornell. I'm with the Native Nations Institute at the University of Arizona. And my guest today is Deron Marquez. Deron was chairman of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians from 1999 to 2006, I think 6.5 years. He has also been a professor teaching politics and policy, holds a PhD in those topics from Claremont Graduate University. And Deron has been involved in Indigenous affairs in the United States for a long time, continues to work in those affairs today, and we're delighted to have him with us for a little while this afternoon to talk about some of the issues that Indigenous nations in the US and other parts of the world are facing and dealing with. So with that, Deron, I wonder if it's been, it's been quite a while since you were chair at San Manuel. I know you've been active in other things, but tell us just a little bit about what you're up to these days and what some of the issues are that you find yourself spending time on.
Well, today I actually find myself more involved with Claremont Graduate University than I ever wanted to be. I was in the classroom. Now I'm actually on the board of trustees. I chair a couple committees there, and like any other university, we are dealing with the issue of higher education being something that is not as fluid as it used to be. So that is my big lift right now. And then on the tribal side, I'm still engaged with the tribe on various committees. One of them being the Palms endeavor in Las Vegas. I help oversee that project, and what a fun one that is. But for the most part, most of my time on the tribal side is dealing with governance issues.
Tell us a little bit more about that. I think one of the striking things about your career is you arrived in tribal government as a newly elected chair in 1999. And as I've heard you say to others, you faced a system which was not very well articulated. And you spent much of your time as tribal chair trying to, in a sense, bring the tribe along into a more structured system that would be more capable of serving the nation's own interests and concerns. Can you tell us just a little bit about what that challenge looked like for you?
Yeah, I mean, the oddity of me coming into that seat, I never grew up on the reservation. I had a mother who was emphatic about not getting involved in tribal politics. And then I found myself at the helm. And when I came into the office, it was very clear that there was a lot of positive attitude, a lot of positiveness within the community, but no one knew what it is they wanted to do or what they wanted from their government. So very early on, we simply asked a question. What do you want your government to look like? What laws do you want on the books? What are the things you want to tackle first? And obviously, the very beginning, it was create some type of educational system, create some type of health and welfare system, down to having running water on the reservation for all the homes. So there were some very simple things that we had to tackle, but then the more complex things like the judiciary. What do you want that to look like? What do you want your business environment to look like? That took a lot of work and a lot of figuring out, trial and error. And when I came in, those are the things we took on first. After 6.5 years, I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm tired. I've done it all that I could do. We were very fortunate that when we came into office, and I say we because it wasn't just me, there was 5 of us on the committee who was doing all this. We had a blank canvas. We were able to do things and try things. And if it didn't work, we were able to pivot away from that and then switch to something that was more attainable or at least more agreeable to the governing structure, which is our tribal council.
How did you help bring the community along with that? It must have been long conversations and engaging the community. I know from other things you've said that it's not a dictator situation. You come in and somehow you have to bring the community along with what you feel needs to happen and what they want to see happen. How'd you do that?
I mean, for me, having the background from this university with Dr. Wilkins, and reading Vine Deloria, it really provided a nice blueprint of how to be a leader. And by being a leader, it means you have to listen. And then you have to listen more. You just can't dictate, as you said. You have to get as much feedback from the depths of your community before you can start to formulate and then move forward with their blessing. You can't just run in there and say, we're going to do this. And if they don't have buy-in, you're never going to get it done. So a lot of listening, a lot of dialogue.
Yeah. Another thing I've heard you talk about, I think San Manuel was already involved in gaming since, 1985 or so.
Yeah.
By the time you came in, it was a casino operation. And I know I've heard you say that one of your first agenda items was to somehow diversify the economy and reduce that dependence on gaming income as your primary source. Tell us a little bit about how you managed to move that forward.
When I first came into office, we actually had a bingo hall and a card room. And we just started doing what was called VLTs, video lottery terminals at that time. We weren't yet a full casino. That didn't happen until 2000 when we had added another building. In my time as chair, we actually built 2 casinos. I don't recommend that ever because that's a whole lot of lifting and a whole lot of work. But you're right. When we first took over in 2000, our goal was to have a diverse economy. And that meant many things, from hotels and office space to warehouse space. We wanted to basically not get away from gaming, but be less reliant on gaming. And we were very successful in creating that model and moving it forward, where today we have businesses from coast to coast, Las Vegas. We have really become a very solid non-gaming engine for our tribal community and bringing those dollars back to the reservation for longevity, because gaming, it's shifting. In fact, the California region last year lost money in gaming.
Yeah. When all that money comes back, I know other nations have often had a lot of pressure from their own citizens to distribute that money in per capita distributions. I've heard you speak about that before. Could you tell us a little bit about not only your views of that issue, but your experience with it at San Manuel?
Per capita it is. I understand why tribal people feel that there should be a system by which they can participate in some type of revenue sharing, profit sharing. I get it. There just has to be a way that it's done in a fashion that doesn't become a sole dependent welfare program. I don't care how much money is going out. It's still a welfare program. And when you have this 100% reliance on the government to provide, you're creating this hollow sense of security. If it ever shifts and goes away, those communities, like our community, is going to be in dire straits of how to become whole in a system that they have no ability to participate in. And that system being finding a meaningful job. You're not going to find a job that's going to equal the per capita checks you're getting from any operation, any tribe. You have to have a system that doesn't become the sole breadwinner in the household when it comes to per capita. My ideas behind per capita were the elders would be the ones who would be the group taken care of by these programs, by these operations. They're the ones who suffer the most. They're the ones who basically survived so that we can be here. They are the ones who I always felt deserved it more than anyone else. The rest of us, we're able bodies. We can go get work. We can go do jobs. We can work in our own government system or our own businesses. But we created a system now that there is no demand, there's no desire, there's really, frankly, there's just not the ability for people to get a job. They don't have that expertise. They don't have that knowledge base anymore.
Do you see a way to pull back from once a nation makes a decision to do per capita, people get pretty attached to it? Do you see a way to pull back from that?
The only way to pull back from it is for failure.
Oh.
Meaning, if in California you have competition come in and you see your monthly income basically on the operations side start to shrink, since it's percentage based, that percentage becomes smaller. That's the only pullback that I can imagine ever occurring. To take it away now, you're asking for just a bunch of headaches and a bunch of trouble.
I want to ask you another question related to this, to the per caps, but mainly to the money coming in. We've seen a lot of nations, I think, where government takes over various functions within the community, some of which used to be culturally based. And I'm thinking, I had one tribal leader say, our young people used to be told by their parents, that lady down the road who lost her husband, you need to take her dinner. Now we've got Meals on Wheels paid by government, so we aren't telling our young people you need to take care of. And she was saying, I think sometimes we have, because we now have resources, we've got our governments doing things maybe they shouldn't be doing and trying to do everything rather than being very careful about what government should or shouldn't do. Do you have any thoughts on that or any reactions to that?
It's interesting because we have these gatherings, and at one time these gatherings were catered. Why not? You have a full-fledged casino and kitchen and 5-star restaurant. Cool. Why not cater that event, right? Over the last few years, that's actually shifted back to the old potluck. Families bringing in dishes to share. And that's the way it used to be. So there is a return to some of that community, that sense of community, that ability to feed each other and be in each other's space in a more traditional cultural setting than the white linen tabletops and the fine china. That's kind of, it's still practiced. I can't say it's not practiced anymore, but there has been a reintroduction of kind of the way it used to be.
Interesting.
I remember going to tribal council meetings with my mother when we were like little, and there would be a potluck in the back room where people would just bring in food, and there's paper plates and plastic forks, and having that return, I think, is healthy.
Yeah. Let's take up another topic that is very much on the minds of a number of tribal leaders these days, and that's what's come to be known as disenrollment and the effort by some nations to exclude current citizens, some of their relatives, from the nation itself. And I know that I have no idea whether San Manuel has been involved in that, but I know it can be a complex topic, and I wondered if you could speak to that at all. It's something we've seen growing among some tribes. It tends to be nations that have a good deal of own source revenue, but not exclusively nations that have that. Any thoughts on the disenrollment issue that's plaguing some nations these days?
It's a sad event in Indian country. I'll just start with that. The good news is we at San Manuel have never had a conversation about performing that. It's not even on our radar. But the reality is those tribes who are engaged in this activity, who rely on the Santa Clara case and say they have the right under that law, or that court case, I should say, to decide who is and who is not, no one's debating that. The question comes, why now? Why now are tribes disenrolling people who have been living on the reservation, who've been believed to be part of that reservation for many, many, many years, who have homes, who grew up there, who went to school there, and now you're being told, well, you're not one of us? That is hard. And then when you dig a little deeper and you talk to some of these individuals and you ask about due process, and they basically say, oh, there is no due process. You send a letter saying, basically, I contest this, and they send a letter back saying, so what? You're still disenrolled. Right. And then, that to me is the hardest part, the inability of someone who has been part of a community to not be able to have a conversation with the same community you've been part of, to get an understanding of why you're disenrolling me. That's the first problem. The second problem that I see is you're creating a traumatic event amongst a new population of Indians. Regardless if they're enrolled or not enrolled, they're still tribal, they're still Indians, and they are creating this event that's just going to be so traumatizing. We don't know yet, and hopefully nothing terribly negative comes about it, but there's going to be some negative atmosphere behind that, and these individuals may find themselves more prone to substance abuse, suicide, and they can't get any help from the IHS. Right. They're no longer enrolled in a tribe. So that to me is more problematic than anything else. And then the third part of that is under ICWA. You have kids who are once part of a reservation who were protected under the ICWA or Indian Child Welfare Act, and now they're not. So we have a third category by which we have to be very mindful of and very concerned about those children who, again, are Indian. For all practical purposes, they are tribal kids. Now they're excluded from that same act that was meant to protect them.
Right.
That's what worries me the most when we have this conversation about disenrollment.
And these are relatives, after all. And
yeah, I mean, they're people we know.
Yeah.
We've had conversations. Yeah. We've gone to fiestas or powwows or cultural events with these individuals, and now they're being told they're not Indian anymore. It's like, why? How did it happen?
One of the issues that something you talked about in an earlier conversation today, you talked about building a school at San Manuel. What is it that you all are hoping to do in doing your own school on your res?
It's very exciting. It really, really is. It's going to be K through 5 to start off with. And it's going to be basically a school that we're going to create, obviously be accredited. And it's going to be what it is we want our youth to learn. In this day and age, as we all are very familiar with the things that are going on in schools, I'm not saying they're bad, but there's a way to teach it. And we want to be in more control of how it's taught to our younger kids. And maybe someday that'll grow into a K through 12. We don't know yet. Right. But right now it's K through 5. We do have a very robust tutorial program, I guess you can say, that engages that same age group. And even college kids can get tutoring from our program to help them get through whatever courses they're taking. Now we're just going to make it more formal. We're going to have a school with teachers, with principals, the whole system is going to be in place, and it's set to open in 25.
That's great. It seems to me this is one of the most interesting things happening in Indian country these days is the effort to reclaim control of education so that it serves the purposes that you have for your people.
Right, and we all know the horrible stories of boarding schools, kids who were going to school in public schools. I remember when I was going to school as a high school student, they kept putting me in shop classes. I am the last person you want to give power tools to, but under my file, being a American Indian student, for some reason they felt that wood shop was my area.
That was appropriate, right?
I was like, right. I'm the last person next to a lathe. Trust me on this one. So.
I once had a leader of a First Nation in Canada say to me, reclaiming education is our ultimate succession plan, because right now we're depending on coming generations and we don't have any influence over what their education is.
None.
And that's what we've got to get back.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it grows into higher ed, but small steps.
Eventually, sure. You do a lot of lecturing and talking around the country about some of these issues and have done that for years, particularly after you stepped down as tribal chair. But as you look across the current situation in the United States, at least, and the issues that Indigenous nations are facing, are there 2 or 3 that really strike you as particularly urgent or particularly concerning right now? And what are the things that, if you're ever kept awake at night, these are the things you find yourself worrying about?
It'll be the encroachment by states at the request of tribes. I think there's a lot of movement, and it's basically on the gaming side of things, where we see tribes wanting to get into like sports betting or online gambling, which is now more state driven. We're seeing this in Florida with what they're doing there. And I think it's a dangerous, uncharted, court not tested yet as far as how does the 14th Amendment now apply to tribes in that side of due process. If you're a non-tribal entity in a state that allows tribes to engage in some operation, there has to be a question there of prejudice. Because how come this group under state law can engage in an activity that no one else can? Right. Unlike federal Indian gaming, where that's a federal relationship, this is becoming a state to tribe relationship. And I think that there is a landmine there that we're not talking about yet. And I know myself and the legal counsel back home, we've had this conversation and we're thinking about how this would or could play out, I should say. But we don't know yet. It's too soon. And that's what keeps me awake more than anything else, because as we talked about earlier, these sovereignty bubbles where tribes are more sovereign in their sphere. When we start to lean into and let states lean back into a state-tribal relationship, it may work today, but who is coming down the road, the next governor, the next assembly or house or senate, who wants more and wants more? And I just don't know where that's going yet.
Right, and I suppose you could see eventually coalitions of states that then are appealing to the federal government for further encroachment.
Just like we saw with the creation of IGRA.
Absolutely.
So, I mean,
right.
That's what has me awake and really watching what's going on more than anything. I mean, along with ICWA and those
right.
always ongoing concerns, that's what really has me worried the most.
Well, I hope you'll be willing to come talk with us again about some of these things as they unfold. These are critical issues. You're one of the people who's out there dealing with these issues from time to time and having to talk about them and make things happen. We really appreciate your coming here and telling us a little bit about what's on your mind now, but also about what you've already done at San Manuel. It's a great story, and I appreciate you telling it because I think a lot of people can learn from that story.
And as we talked about on our way over to this interview, the more we can share with each other,
right.
the more, or I should say, the easier it is for tribal nations to do things and see things and have conversations about what they want to do and talk to someone who's done it.
Right. And who may have made mistakes and is willing to acknowledge that and say, and then we figured it out and here's what worked.
Everyone makes mistakes, so just learn from it and move on.
Well, a lot of stuff has worked at San Manuel, so it's a great story. Thanks for taking the time with us, Deron. Really appreciate it. And thanks to you for watching this encounter with Deron Marquez.